So the National Council on Problem Gambling, we were founded in 1972 as the advocates for problem gamblers and their families. And that means we're neutral on legalized gambling. So we don't take a position for or against legalized gambling. We're there to be neutral because we want problem gamblers who experience a lot of shame and stigma to feel comfortable in coming to us. We want them to be able to come to us as the one place that's not going to judge them. But that stance of neutrality also helps us work with operators and vendors because we're not judging them either. Instead, we want to make sure we're minimizing harm for anybody with a gambling problem while allowing operators and vendors to maximize revenue in a socially responsible way. So right now, obviously, sports betting is the issue of the moment, but we're really working on the problem gambling side with legislators and regulators to make sure that there's public funds from gambling revenue that go back into problem gambling prevention and treatment programs. On the other side, we're equally active on the responsible gambling side, and that's working with operators and vendors, leagues and teams, and the media to make sure that there's programs and policies in place to reduce harm from expanded sports betting. So half of it's the safety net side, half of it's the responsible gambling side. It's hard because many people with a gambling problem feel they're always one bet away from winning everything back. So it can encourage persistence far beyond what may be reasonable. And so reaching people with severe gambling problems is a lot different than reaching people who are at risk. And then you also have to look at recreational gamblers. So we rely, quite frankly, on the industry itself. We work with them to craft messages that are going to appeal to recreational players, to keep them recreational, to help at-risk players reduce their harm, and to help problem gamblers get the help they need. But the industry plays an enormously valuable role in that, and they can really help us by helping identify the customers and the messages that work for each of those groups. There's tremendous technology that's present now in the UK and Europe and is coming to the United States, where we're able to identify risk patterns. So the computer's never going to tell you that you're a problem gambler, but they may well tell you that you've got some risky behaviors that may warrant some additional intervention. There are blocking software on your apps, on your mobile phone. There's payment processors like Sightline that are doing really good stuff with helping self-exclude gamblers from payments across all gambling operators, and we've partnered with these groups for years and years. And so there's some really great technology, some really great technology that's coming down the pike that's going to be very helpful in responsible gaming. Payments folks have both a great lens on responsible gaming, but perhaps a higher obligation, because with a global view of a gambling customer, they're going to see excessive spend, for example, across all these different areas, where an operator may only see spend for one operator. Payments provider can see at a global level, and they can also play a really great role in helping block access. So, we've all the way back to 1999, we've been working with payments providers to allow gamblers to exclude themselves, and that means they can limit their card use at any gambling facility that's serviced by that payment provider. And so it's a wonderful tool. And then there's more they can do in helping us understand gambling customers and understanding those who are at risk, and helping develop some predictions, predictive algorithms, whatnot, to help separate risky gamblers and encourage them down one path from other recreational gamblers to go down another path. Well, in a perfect world, payments is integrating with, responsible gambling, and payments is integrating with the operators. That's integrating with advocates like us. We're talking to the public health folks. So it's a comprehensive approach that has all the stakeholders playing their role. No one stakeholder can do it all. Payments has a role, but they can't solve this problem. And it's important to note, gambling addiction is a disease. It can never be eliminated. It can only be minimized. So the goal is not abstinence. The goal is not elimination. The goal is prevention and minimization. And to that end, everybody has a role to play. And again, many operators like Sightline are playing a progressive role, but there's a lot more we can do as gambling expands. And the field is going to change. Sports betting is going to bring a new dynamic to this, and that's something that we're really staying on top of, working with folks like Sightline to make sure that we're up to date with our responsible gaming messages and tools. Well, some of the passion comes from we operate a national helpline, and that received about 220,000 calls last year. And so we hear directly from people with gambling problems. We hear them have struggle with this issue, having few resources to turn. They face a lot of shame and stigma, and so that drives our passion to try and provide solutions. We know gambling is not harmful for about 98% of people who gamble, but for the 2% that have a problem, that's about 6 million Americans. For those folks, it's a serious issue. It's a devastating mental health disorder, and there's a lot more that we can do to make sure that we're minimizing their harm and improving their recovery as much as possible. So that's what motivates me. When you operate a helpline and you hear day in and day out, we get an average of one call every 90 seconds. That's more than enough motivation for most. So gambling addiction can affect anyone, of course, but higher risk groups include young males who are veterans and who prefer games of skill, which is in some ways sports. So warning signs include things like being unable to set and stick to the limits of time and money that you spend gambling. And here again, payment providers can play an enormous role in helping people set and stick to their limits of time and money spent gambling. But it also is things like tolerance. If you need to bet more and more money to achieve that same excitement, that's tolerance, and it's exactly similar to an alcoholic having to drink more and more beer, or a cocaine addict having to have more and more cocaine to achieve that same high. Your brain gets deadened. Excessive gambling can deaden those same areas of your brain that are deadened by cocaine and alcohol. And last but not least, one of the biggest warning signs, the obvious warning sign, is harm. And it's not just financial harm, but that's easiest for an outsider to see, but it's the psychological harm. It's the harm to your friends, your relationships, your family, your job, and ultimately even your physical health. So problem gamblers experience much higher rates of things like stress and depression, and these are external warning signs that others may be able to spot. Well, so we've now enabled text and chat to our helpline. Our website obviously has information referral resources, but what help looks like, it looks a lot like help for traditional addictions like alcohol and drug abuse. So, there are 12-step programs, which are very successful if you stick with it. And then there's, of course, therapy. And soon there's probably some medications that are going to be available to help people reduce their urges and cravings for gambling, just as we reduce urges and cravings for substances. Well, we know that in some ways lottery play is because it's the most broadly participated form of gambling. Many people with gambling problems play the lottery, even if that's not their most severe problem. But for us, the prediction is really early onset. So similar to tobacco, for example, the earlier you start gambling, the more likely you are to have a problem. It's the same thing with tobacco. Every year you delay tobacco onset, the less likely you are to have a problem. So age of onset for us is probably more predictive than the type of thing you play. So people with severe gambling problems that come to treatment, and that's not all problem gamblers, but severe problem gamblers that come to treatment tell us they started betting for money between 10 and 12 years old. So if you're not reaching them at late elementary school, they've already gambling, and you now need to move on to some educational opportunities to try and help minimize that risk. So it can start incredibly early. Well, he's probably walking into a casino. He may not be betting, but he's certainly exposed to gambling, and that exposure, can be the start of a lifelong problem. We see what kids tend to gamble on the most are lottery tickets and sports betting. And as we expand sports betting and as we sell lottery tickets and vending machines, that accessibility is only going to increase. The advertising and promotion is going to increase. So we're going to need to, step up our countermeasures, if you will. Well, I think problem gambling is a preventable and treatable disorder. And there's a huge opportunity in the United States for vendors and operators to step up and say, we want to get ahead of the curve. Our value proposition as a nonprofit with almost 50 years of experience in this issue is to say, we can work with you to devise better solutions than government can impose. And we can be much more efficient and effective in that. But if you want to wait, that's fine, but eventually the hammer is going to come down. We're seeing enormous backlash in the UK right now. We've seen backlash in the United States. So for the sustainability of your business, for good economics and good ethics, responsible gambling is the way to go. There's really no downside. And the smart operators, folks and the vendors like Sightline are going to be there ahead of the problem. The others are going to wait, but at one point or another, there will be a backlash. So, we can work with you to minimize it and get ahead of it, but social responsibility is not an option anymore. It's a requirement.